And welcome back, everyone, to another edition of the Prove Me Wrong podcast. I'm your host, Pete Lieb. I have a great show for you tonight. My guest is Linda Godfrey, and it's one of those nights where if you've ever been in the woods, you've been camping, it's dark outside, you hear something that you can't explain, heaven forbid you see something that you can't explain, tonight's the night for you. Linda is the author of many books, including American Monsters and I Know What I Saw, that we're going to primarily discuss tonight. She actually has something like 18 published books on strange creatures, phenomena, and people in total. Linda is a frequent guest on national television, TV, podcasts, and radio shows, including, and among others, The Dead Files, The Unexplained, Fox Red Eye, Monsters and Mysteries, Inside Edition, Coast to Coast AM, the list goes on and on. You can find Linda on her website, lindagodfrey.com, as well as amazon.com. And she's here with me again tonight. So, like I said, welcome, Linda, to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here, and I'm glad we're not talking about viruses.
Oh, no doubt. Not this time. Maybe next time.
Maybe, yeah, virus. Well, they're all kind of monsters in their own way, I guess. Teeny ones. Just
for sure, right?
The invisible ones, yeah.
Small but mighty, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had the privilege of speaking before, so if you don't mind, could you give me just a few moments, and how did you get started in this field of study? Was there a personal experience that led you down the path of tracking monsters?
Not really. It was completely unexpected. I actually have a degree in art education, and I was trying to get established in the world of cartooning, really seriously trying to do that. And in the meantime, I was working some part-time jobs. I was doing substitute teaching, and I started bringing cartoons to our local newspaper for free because I just wanted to have some printed samples. And one day I happened to talk to the editor. I called in for a usual talk, and it happened that the main reporter she wasn't fired. She had quit that day. And so they said, well, would you like to be a reporter? Well, I should say the guy I was on the phone with said that. Everybody else's jaws were dropping because he had no idea if I could be a reporter of any kind. But I said, well, sure, just immediately almost. It sounded great. They had been paying me $8 a week for the political cartoons I was doing. And so it would be a little bit more than that.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
So that's the whole circumstance by which that started the ball rolling on these events that I'm sitting here like 30 years later contemplating. How did that happen? But no, it was just that I got hired. It was late fall of the year, and I right away started doing some stories about dog mutilations and other weird things that just happened to be, I don't know if that's why the other reporter quit or what, it was kind of a grisly topic. And I was talking to the county animal control officer about these other things and decided to ask him if he'd heard about this rumor that people were bandying about in my hometown of Elkhorn, Wisconsin, where people said that they were just driving down the road some night, sometimes day, and they saw what they described as a werewolf. It looked like a very large wolf or German Shepherd dog walking or running upright on its hind legs, and that it was able to sometimes hold things palms upturned in its not the way that canines usually eat things. It was they could use their paws like hands, and for sure it wasn't human because they could see it running on the toe pads, which makes it look like it's a much smaller footprint than a human would make. Mm-hmm. And they could see the fangs and the pointy ears on top of the head and covered with fur. Wasn't wearing blue jeans or anything hokey like that. And so I thought, well, maybe it's some rabid animal people have the right to know about. And I asked the animal control officer, and he said, oh, you mean this? And he opens this drawer in his desk and pulls out a file folder. The file folder is marked werewolf. So I thought, well, that's kind of it, because whenever you've got a county officer with a file folder marked werewolf in his official work desk, that's news, So I was really impressed when he opened it up and showed me that it was filled with contact info for various people around the county, the ones who had been calling in and saying, I saw this thing. I don't know what it was, but if there was such a thing as a werewolf, this would be it. And I noticed when I looked at the names that there was a wide diversity of occupations, men, women, blue collar, white collar. It wasn't like, one band of high school guys or something like that. A couple of them I sort of knew, living in the same small town. And I thought, well, also, if you were going to hoax something, would you go to your county official and leave all your contact info so they could come and get you?
Right.
And that didn't seem to make sense either. So when I went and interviewed them, they all seemed credible. I believed their stories. We ran this story thinking it would just be, maybe people would talk about it for a couple of weeks. Maybe somebody would find out what it was. And instead, it just kind of blew up, and that was before the internet was as we have it now. So for something to get famous, it had to have quite a bit of punch and go out on Associated Press. And that's exactly what happened. And within a couple of weeks, we had first all the local TV stations came from Madison and Milwaukee, Chicago, and then some of the farther flung ones, some of the really old, I'm trying to think of his name. It was Inside Edition for the time. Mm-hmm. Bill, I can't think of his last name at the moment. But so, it sounds really archaic now. But at the time, it was quite a sensation.
Right.
And the big thing was that more impactful for me than the fact that the press was paying a lot of attention to it was the fact that I began getting phone calls and snail mail letters because, again, the internet we didn't have, even Yahoo at that time. And people were saying, don't make fun of this because it's real. I saw the same thing, or my grandfather saw the same thing. And these calls were not coming from my county. They were coming from all over the United States. And even I had one from France and one from the Virgin Islands. It had really gotten around. And people were insisting that this was something real.
So was this in a rural area?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
mm-hmm.
And so you say you had a lot of eyewitness accounts on this. And that was how long ago again? I'm sorry.
That story was printed over New Year's Eve weekend of 1991 into 1992.
So almost 30 years ago. Are you still seeing reports of this beast at that point? Now, today?
I do actually now and then get one from that area. I now have friends who live on that road who will tip me off, and there's a farmer that I've been working with who's had a lot of the strange mutilations in his farm field. We call it the mini Skinwalker Ranch because, just
mm-hmm.
To kind of joke about it, but it isn't really any joke. We've had some really scary things happen out there. But I still get reports, but they're not always from Wisconsin even. I get them from, I'm getting more and more from the western states. Right off the bat, I started getting them from Pennsylvania and Ohio, that region, and then East Coast and down into Texas and Arizona. They really come from all over. And they seem to be the same thing, most of them, with some exceptions.
So when you're talking about these mutilations, are they literally just like something's being cut open, or does it show some evidence of feeding? Is it like that particular beast is feeding on the cattle, or is it just something is dissecting it?
Well, it looks more like a very skillful feeding technique.
Okay.
And it's the type where something, and I'm not convinced that all of them are this creature because some overlap with features that you'll find in mountain lion killings, and we have mm-hmm. mountain lions, believe it or not, in this region of Wisconsin. In fact, I saw one just a couple of weeks ago myself. So there are several things it could be, but most of the mutilations that were found out on this farm, and still are occasionally, and deer carcasses were the main thing being put out. They would have like almost a surgical removal of one of usually the front leg quarter, and they followed that same thing that you always hear, that it looked like a sharp knife had cut it, and certain parts were taken, certain parts were left, and there was one of those that I really believe now was a mountain lion. Sometimes they would leave footprints, but those weren't always easy to find because it was kind of dry, bumpy soil most of the time, not really great for leaving prints. So when there were prints, you knew that it was something very heavy and weighed a lot in order to impress itself down into the field. And sometimes the prints would start on the edge of the woods line and go out to the center of the field and stop, and vice versa. Sometimes they would start. It was like somebody dropped off right in the center of the field and walked to the wood line and then disappeared. We've had light phenomena, all kinds of things, and everything that has happened out there correlates with so many other anomalies all around the country that it just feels there's this. I didn't feel it then, but I do now after 30 years, that there are associations between all of these things, or why would different people be seeing the same thing and experiencing the same thing wherever they go around the country.
It definitely seems like it would be difficult, because once you build a reputation in that area as having a wolf-like beast, a wolf-man beast, any type of mutilation that happens at that point is more than likely going to be attributed to that legend, right? So like you said, right. Some of them probably weren't. Some of them looked more surgical, like they were just cutting pieces off. Some look like a mountain lion. That's going to be a challenge for you, as to how to separate those into categories and kind of vet them out.
Right. And I've made myself into kind of a student of these things. I'm always trying to figure out and reading sort of arcane books on big cats and how they work, and then trying to apply it to the field. Mm-hmm. The very first mutilations were just, I think there was a badger, and there was a big, kind of a big raccoon and a possum, and then with the bigger animals. And the interesting thing is that, just to show you the similarity and the difference, something I learned was that mountain lions very often use that. They'll they can pull their index claw out farther than the other ones, and they can use it almost as a knife, and they will take a leg quarter off. They will meticulously clean out all of the fur. They don't like to have that in their way, so you'll see piles of fur scattered all around the carcass, and then they like to go for the heart and the liver, and they'll, if they have enough time, they'll take out the stomach and intestines and put those aside. They don't want those. And then there are other animals that will kind of leave that, but coyotes go in from the other side. I could sit here and give you all the characteristics all evening, but it's kind of interesting when you realize how specialized each one of these animals are. And then sometimes there are just lights and weird things happen, things that you can't really explain. For instance, there was one that was found. It was decapitated, and it looked like nobody could figure out how it could have happened. And the owner of the farm took it to see a butcher, and he said, what would it take for somebody to, separate this from that? And the butcher said, well, you'd have to have a chopping block and a huge butcher's knife in order to do that. And we're like, well, that's scarier. Having somebody run around that field at night with a chopping block and a butcher's knife is scarier than the creature itself, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely a concerning image, right? It's something you want to think about.
Yeah, exactly. So that was the start.
which has led you down this road 30 years later. And so I know what I saw. That's a great title, by the way. I mean, I just love it. Every time it immediately communicates exactly kind of the tone of the book to me. I know what I saw.
Thank you. Well, it's taken from several people. I try and record them and have them write things out for me. And so many people say that. And there are several places in this book where I'm directly quoting them. And that usually comes out because they're so disgusted that no one believed them after having this clear sighting. And it especially usually comes out if you go to any type of state hunting or wildlife agency or even the independent ones. They'll almost without exception tell you, no, that's not what you saw. And people just get so frustrated. And I really believe that if that were not the prevailing attitude, that we'd have even more sightings. And, since that time, over 30 years, really probably in the last 5 years, the dogman idea has gotten much bigger than it was. And there are many more places for people to go and report encounters with these creatures. And there are plenty of, I could never possibly go and investigate all of those myself. So, I think it's kind of a good thing that other people are, and then it makes it more credible too, if more people are, who are credible witnesses are seeing the same things. So,
well, what's interesting to me is the dual nature of an eyewitness, because if the authorities need what you're saying, you are instantly credible, and everything that you say is fact. So eyewitnesses to a robbery, they're immediately believed. They're fact. He was wearing a blue shirt and black pants. Maybe they weren't. You don't remember that. But as soon as you start to tell them something that they don't know what to do with, i.e., I saw a beast out on Bray Road, or I saw lights in the sky, you are immediately discounted. So it's interesting how an eyewitness is an eyewitness, but in some cases you are believed. In some cases you are just immediately dispatched as a loon or crazy in some way.
Right, definitely. And I made a documentary video out just this past year called Return to Wildcat Mountain about this huge concentration of both tan and surprisingly black mountain lions, because black ones aren't supposed to exist. And some of the main witnesses, one is a retired he's a sheriff's deputy, a retired sheriff's deputy, and we have another one that worked as a game warden, and especially in this particular area where there are a lot of them. And if you can't believe these guys, who can you believe? And when you see them in the movie, they're very, very, it's just so much more convincing, because you just see how straight up they're telling it, and it makes a lot of difference. And yet still, they say even then they still get razzed once in a while.
Absolutely.
So you just have to sort of, and I know I've had my encounters, and when those started, took 20 years pretty much until I started. But once they did, I didn't tell anybody for a few years, because I knew exactly what would be said. And it's even worse when you're working on something and well, of course she would say that she saw it.
Right. You go out looking for something, and suddenly you found something, right? Exactly.
Right. And usually it doesn't happen that way. Almost never somebody says, I'm going to go out and shoot the werewolf. That's how they usually put it. I don't believe it's a werewolf, in the way people usually think of that, but that's what they'll say. And people going out with lots of guns, lots of electronic equipment are normally not the ones who run into it. And for myself, any encounters I've had, although most of mine have ironically been with Sasquatch, not the dog man, but it's always when, sometimes I haven't even had my phone with me. I just went out on a whim and went. We used to live right next door, literally, to the Kettle Moraine State Forest, which has been known around the county secretly as a place for Bigfoot for many years, probably 50 or 60 years or more. And just nothing on my mind, but usually I'll take a walk when I'm trying to work something out in a book, and thinking of nothing like having a sighting, and boom, there they are.
So when you are talking about, and the byline of your book is Encounters with Monsters of New Urban Legend and Ancient Lore, What do you consider a monster? Are you just kind of using that interchangeably with like a cryptid?
Yeah, it's a very generic term.
Okay.
And people can talk. I mean, there are monster trucks. There are people can have monster movies about giant ants. People. It's so overused. It's in one way kind of deadened, but in the other way, it's nice to have something that fits so many situations and people know what you're talking about. So it gets used a lot, the term monster. And for me, it's something that is just out of sync, something that is not your everyday bread and butter creature. There is some sort of anomaly with it. And for instance, a good example is the Dog Man, which comprised really a lot of the sightings in Walworth County here. And it looks completely in most, and I give some exceptions because there are what seem like subspecies, or for lack of a better term, but most of them look like a giant wolf or timber wolf or dog, like a German Shepherd. People will describe the long snout and the pointy ears and all of that sort of thing. But if they see the back end of it, usually there's a tail. And none of it is supernatural. It's not like it has green scales, although there are lizard men that do. But just talking, according to the witnesses, but just talking about this thing, its real claim to fame is that it walks and runs on its toe pads or of its hind legs. And that is not a supernatural act. It's any mammal can be induced or will naturally run on its hind legs if it's, say, hurt its front limbs. Memaybe its front limb got caught in a trap or something and is injured, or if it wants to see above some meadow grass or something like that. It can be done, but it's not a normal or natural or comfortable position for most animals to make. So normally they don't. And I've contacted a lot of people in 30 years whenever I can find myself a wolf expert or somebody with a lot of experience. I ask if they have ever seen or know about any wolf-like creatures that are said to be consistently walking or running around on their hind legs. And I've never found a single one that has said yes. Now, maybe they are sort of playing the same game and know if they say yes, they've seen these things, that they're going to get booted out of their profession. And they may be right. But it's not unnatural in the kind of terms that we're thinking of. What does kick them over a little bit to the monster side is their behavior, which is when they seem almost insolent to people who run into them. People will say, even if they're in their car, they'll say, it was running across the road, it stopped and stared me in the eyes and just locked my eyes on it for, what seems like an eternity. And sometimes imparts what they feel is sort of a message, not in words, but they'll say, I really felt it was saying to me, I could jump on top of your car and get you, or I could do this, or, if you tell anybody, I'll come and find you. That kind of, which is somewhat specific for not needing words to be understood.
What is the difference, if you don't mind, what is the difference between a dog man and a werewolf?
Semantics, I think, in most cases. Although most people these days think of, partly because of Hollywood, way back in the early 1900s when they began making movies and chose monsters for a lot of those first black and white films, they were making up a lot of things that would actually enhance the scariness of the film. Like, for instance, the idea that if you're bitten, then that'll carry it on. That sort of thing is Hollywood's take on the old European legends, where at one time werewolves were completely believed to be humans that fully turned into wolf-like creatures, and that they'd go out and eat people. And there actually were many incidents where humans were caught and eaten, whole herds of sheep, and people weren't positive, but they blamed it on werewolves anyway. Lots of semi-religious legends that had to do with them. They're different in that way.
How far back do those stories go? How far back does the werewolf legend go?
Well, if you're talking about something that looks like is what they call theriocentric. I'm not pronouncing that word correctly. Anyway, half man, half animal. Therianthropic, that's what I was trying to reach for. That goes back to the very earliest known civilizations. And in fact, I just saw one in some archaeological magazine that they trace back to just about farther than any other civilization. And still there were scratchings on the wall that looked like some type of animal, some type of human with a tail on it and something that could have been horns. So almost any time, and it doesn't matter if they're in the Asian continent or into North America, it doesn't matter where you are or how far you go back, there's this core idea of the human and the animal having some sort of duality or some sort of commonalities, probably a better word, that seems so basic that it comes out in their art, even when there is very little other art. Those ideas, you go to the Egyptians, and you can think of how the whole panorama of their gods were half animal, half creature. Anubis. Many times, this is sort of interesting to me too. With the upright dogs, they don't always look exactly like German Shepherds. Sometimes people, when they see one, especially when the fur is jet black, and they'll say it had very tall ears, very tall pointy ears, and they'll say it reminded me of Anubis, or that it reminded me of that Egyptian creature that looked like half black dog, half human. And so that's a very common thing. It's almost like it's something inside of us that we're conditioned to see.
So and I know what I saw. This is a collection. You've received a lot of eyewitness accounts. What type of vetting how did you decide which stories would go in the book and which would not? And then how do you also determine who's potentially not being truthful with you, and what are the more factual stories that you find?
Yeah, those are really good questions, and something as a former newspaper reporter,
right?
Because I wrote for that paper for 10 more years after that first article came out, and I had maybe 2 or 3 updates where I'd gotten a little spate of sightings and I shared them, in the paper. Other than that, I really wasn't writing about it at all. So what I do appreciate, though, for working at that paper that long was I was writing a lot of feature articles about people who were special in very different occupations, and I had to interview between 1 and 3 people a week, and you do the math and take that over 30 years, and actually it was 20 years, I guess, that I was, or 10 years at the paper and then 20 after that. But still, that's a lot of interviews. Mm-hmm. And so I think any reporter will tell you, you kind of develop your spidey sense, after a while. Sometimes things just don't ring true, or you ask it again and there's a different answer. And I've always been careful about that sort of thing. But then it's also become much easier since that time with the onset of the internet, where people can tell you something. They'll say, well, it was in this cavern called Pittsville Cavern, and you can go and look up Pittsville Cavern, and that's just something I just made up. Nobody should go start hunting for that. But you start looking for it, and you find out that there wasn't any such thing as Pittsville Cavern until such and such a year, because of, so you can find things out on the internet. You can check out things people tell you. And the wilder the story, the more I really check people out, and if they're not so far away that I can't get there easily, I will preferably like to interview people in person, mm-hmm. or if that's not available, a phone call is good. I'll have them write it out on paper for me. And for instance, there was one story that was really a good and amazing story, and it sort of solidified another thing that I wanted to talk about. And it was a man who had written into me from Canada. And at the time, he was telling me about when several of his friends, and he had taken the dad's farm truck, and they were driving in circles around out in the field with a rifle, trying to just shooting at raccoons or something at night. That in itself might sound weird, but I married a farm boy, and that's exactly what they did for fun.
Okay.
On Saturday nights before everybody was dating. So I know it's a thing. Older farm kids do that. So they were doing this, and they saw this animal, and they saw it several times as they rode out in a circle around the field. They came back, and it would be there a little closer, looking to him. And this looked like some kind of canine with a lion's mane. It had a big orange mane on it. And they seemed at first pretty agreed. And then the more I talked to them about it and just kind of checked things out, the more it started kind of falling apart. And then everybody's descriptions sounded different. And finally there was just one discrepancy. And I said, sorry guys, I can't take this. Well, can't use it. It was too bad. It would have been something great to show. And then there are other ones where you think, well, this is never going to pan out. I think it was in the book just before this one, the one called Monsters Among Us, where I told the story of this family from Northern Illinois that they were in a very strict evangelical church. They were just really nice, salt of the earth people. He was a veteran. She had always been like a homemaker. They had two really nice teenage kids, and they were sitting in church, in which and it wasn't a real big church either. They were under 100 members, I think, something like that. And they had pews that sort of faced each other. They were sort of U-shaped, so they faced people in the pew across from them. And they were up in the front because they'd been late that day. And there was this woman that sat down across from them in a pew, and the wife said there was something about her. I just kept turning my head a little bit to look at her because she seemed sort of like she was off color, like she had been sick or something. She had sort of a grayish complexion and just very ordinarily dressed, kind of drab, neutral colors. Nothing outstanding about her. And she said the pastor was up on this little platform, and he finished his sermon, and the next thing he always did was set his Bible down and then go to do their second portion of the church service was like a song time. So he started to move to go down the steps and sing with his family, and all of a sudden this woman stood up, let out this huge screaming roar, and almost simultaneously I don't want to say turn into, but projected as a werewolf, as a wolf, a very bigger than human sized wolf, just instantaneously. Well, how do you believe that?
Yeah.
It's very, but the family, I mean, they continued on, and I interviewed them, 3 or 4 times at great length in person with my husband along, one time to make sure I wasn't mishearing things. Well, the ushers were still up there, and the minister opened up his Bible and kind of jabbed it at the creature and rebuked it. And the ushers that were up there didn't even think about it. They just sort of collapsed on the woman onto the pew, and within seconds it looked like a woman again. The irony was everybody was busy opening their hymnals and getting ready to sing, so almost nobody actually saw her, but they heard the scream and were looking around to see where that was coming from. And she ended up getting dragged to the back, past the back curtain, out of everybody's sight real quickly. And the kids saw it, and they were very frightened. And the parents tried to tell them it was, some other thing, like a dog ran in and ran back out. And they're like, what, you think we're stupid? We're teenage. We're old enough to understand that. Well, they gave me a lot of correlating facts as to where the church was and which I found and tracked down, and it wasn't easy because it was gone now. But at the time they said it was there. This had happened like 10 years before.
Mm-hmm.
At the time they said it was there. It was there. And everybody they named was who they said and did what they wanted. I tracked down the minister. He wouldn't talk to me about it. He said, what happens in our church services is a private matter. But I was given no reason to disbelieve it, and so I generally like to, when I can find enough evidence that I feel comfortable presenting the tale, I like to leave it to people to make up their own minds. I like them to hear the way that the people talked about it. That was one reason that I wanted to do the book, the movie, because I wanted people, it's even better when people can see the witness talking rather than just having to have it translated through me. So there was just no reason not to use it. And they even drew sketches of what the woman looked like separately, and I could see it was the same features. Just everything you would ask for to have it correlated was there.
So how much evidence do you typically receive from the eyewitnesses that you talk to? And I mean, I asked that question again because in this day and age, it's really easy to manufacture evidence, right? Pictures and video. Right. You can't believe anything you see.
Well, pictures are probably the worst. And I started getting those from people almost right away, and I could always tell it was, Uncle Bill up in the cornfield with a Halloween costume over, his head and some fake claws on or something like that. Most of them fall into that category. Then there's the fuzzy thing next to the bush in the woods, and a great number of them are like that. Some people have started putting together slightly better ones, and there are also some where, I'll say to the person perfectly truthfully, you may well have seen, I believe you saw something. You may well have seen, an upright wolf, but I can't, there just is not enough information on this photo to give me that belief, that it is actually real. There was one going around the past couple of years that you could tell people had toyed with the light in the dark, etc. And it appeared to have been made up of a taxidermist model with some other parts added to it, and was supposedly walking up a ditch. It looked too small to be what people usually describe. Usually they describe something between 5.5 to 7 feet tall, which isn't it's not an impossible height for a timber wolf or a gray wolf to be on its hind legs. But anyway, so I really looked at most photographs, and then videos now are much more common with a pretty jaundiced eye, because I just have never seen one that I can go, yep, that's the one. I can't say that there's there's any reason why you wouldn't say that was an upright wolf, because I just haven't seen it, where it's clear. Nothing as good as there is, and I think the one they call Patty, for the Bigfoot, iconic Bigfoot short film, is much better than anything I've seen, and pretty good, and I would never say that's not a real thing. It's just, it's too good for its time, actually, almost.
So the Patterson film is still kind of the gold standard for Bigfoot.
I think I do think the Patterson film is the gold standard. Maybe there are better, but I've never seen any better photo for any cryptid than that.
Well, you said you started doing your own field research, and you started really kind of seeing things on your own. How do you typically conduct your research? What equipment do you use? Where do you typically go?
Well, it just varies, everyone is different. I actually started that right away back in the early 90s when this happened, when the Sun magazine called and asked me to go and procure a chicken and set it somewhere where I could watch it. And so the newspaper photographer and I staked out most of the night watching a grocery store chicken. There was nothing touched, of course, by morning, unfortunately. But, I basically started out with a photographer and a chicken. And it's so much easier nowadays with cell phones. It's just like 1,000 times better and easier. Although it's still really hard to get that good shot. I don't take more than I think is going to be necessary. I have a tri-field meter. I always like to kind of mess around and see if there's any different sort of readings from electromagnetic fields magnetic energy that it measures. I do always have some sort of ruler or measuring tape or something like that, because without something to measure what you've got, there's nothing to compare it to for size, and it just ruins a lot of footprint samples and other stuff if you don't have that. I like to carry plaster of Paris making things in the trunk of my car. My husband does not care for that habit, and we'll take it out every
Yeah.
and I'll have to run and get it. But I like to have that in my car just in case, because you hate to miss if you get a good print, and it has been used and come in handy several times. So those kind of things I've got. I've got nighttime binoculars. I've got just various instruments. And as I said, it's almost like they know when you're carrying electronics or placing electronics, because that's when almost nothing happens. And I've seen that time after time, so many places. I do try to get around as best as I can. It's not a high paying job. People are disappointed to learn that I'm not a millionaire after this many years, but I did the math with a big store greeter and found out that they made about 4 times what I did the previous year, a full-time store greeter. So I can't take like big trips all over the world, like the old time adventurers. But when I can get to one, I have several trusted people that I like to have go with me. It's pretty dangerous to go to many of these places without someone, just to be at your back or whatever. And
so what you said, you had a couple of Bigfoot experiences. Can you tell me about those?
Yeah, and actually, they're in my books. There's one. The first one happened in 2012. And I call that, I call it the Bigfoot branch, because just to shorten this, about 100 feet away from me, maybe about 40 feet up in a very healthy, vigorous oak tree, something snapped off a limb right in front of my eyes in 2 moves. And it was August. There was no wind of any kind. Hadn't been any windstorms. It was a brand new oak tree. And yet this thing, there was one big lightning crash sound, and when the wood was first twisted, and then the second one, it was torn from the tree and dropped, like 40 feet down into this kettle right in front of me. And I later went back with some friends and measured everything, and the branch was 35 feet long and about 8 inches in diameter, and there were no woodpecker holes in it. There were no saw marks. It would have been crazy. This was surrounded by kind of really low down kettle area where nobody would have been. It's really full of brambles and things like that. People don't go down around it. I just happened to have I won't go into the whole thing, but if you go to lindagodfrey.com and go onto the home page, there's a little search box, and just search for Bigfoot branch, and you can see all my photos of the branch and other parts and get the more complete version of it.
But to date, you haven't had anything like a footprint or anything like that you've been able to cast? You did? Yeah,
I have found footprints. The prints that were around that area were really difficult to get. I could see them plainly, but the soil that the glacier brought through, that's what formed that whole state forest, left lots of pebbles and things. So it's not a really good, and also it was at a slant where I saw it, so that one wasn't good. And very, very often you have to have pretty good substrate to get a good. Usually there's like old leaf mold, covering the forest floor, or something else. So it's hard to find it. But I've had better luck in farm fields and around that one farm on Bray Road, that sort of place, and other places that I've been. So we do have, the prints are probably the best thing, and I've had a number of times where there have been pretty clear dogman prints, where people have reported them. If I'm able to go like the next day or so, I do. And that's, of course, when you have the best luck, before everything gets rained out or raked away or whatever.
And are those on your website also, all that?
I periodically put the dogman ones on. I think you can find some dogman ones. There's a frequently asked question tab, and then there's another one, the Beast of Bray Road, that has. I think it's on that one. it's growing into this huge thing.
Yeah.
I have to clean that website out. But yeah, and I've shown them at different things. So
what are some of the more unique sightings that you have recorded?
Other than the two that I told you about?
Yeah, I mean, just some things you've gotten from eyewitnesses,
Right.
the more, not the Bigfoot or the werewolf. What are some of the more unique things that we don't hear about much?
Well, one actually that has been in the news quite a bit the past few years, but wasn't for a long time, is the thing that some people, it was initially called bat squatch, and it's very, very similar to Mothman, something that looks like a big furry flying creature, but with bat-like wings, usually dark bat-like wings. The one that named it bat squatch was out in Seattle, Washington, I think. Well, on the western side of Wisconsin, which is bordered by the Wisconsin River, and there are cliffs and all kinds of things like that, I received a report from a man who said he and his son were driving in the area near La Crosse and had this huge black thing come swooping at their truck from out of the darkness. And they just, caught a look at it in their headlights, and it appeared that it was going to come just smash flat into their windshield. And it was one of these big old trucks, so it was a pretty big windshield. And just before it did, and they thought they were goners, the son was driving, and the dad, who was maybe about 55 or so, was sitting in the other part of the seat. The creature, just after they got a good look at the body and said it looked like a fur-covered humanoid, it just made this screeching noise and took straight up over the treetops and went somewhere nearby. They couldn't see it. And the son managed to pull, they were panicked. He pulled the truck over. And he said the son was sick. He had to get out and throw up. The father got sick later. I called it the man bat. And it's in a couple of my books. But these creatures are more common than people would think. There have been all kinds of them seen around Chicago, which is really, really an anomalous type of thing in the past couple of years. And I think probably a few of them are people trying to hoax a little bit, but there are too many for them there not to be good credence to all of a good portion of the claims. So I think that these are completely mysterious things. And the Mothman in West Virginia at Point Pleasant, I was actually out there with a German team earlier before Christmas or so, and that was probably one of the craziest, scariest times I've had, because we were out at what they call there were these silos, concrete silos that used for ordnance at one time. And we were out there. It was completely dark. We had no lights other than the photography team's shooting lights. And about the time that the darkness fell and it got really dark, we started hearing what sounded like a huge herd of coyotes and some kind of giant wolf having a horrible fight. And it kept getting closer. And they were trying to get me, to walk around in these ordnance silo things. And there's lots of weird stuff on the walls, and they're really gross, by the way. But the whole thing was so spooky because we kept hearing what sounded like an extremely bad fight of some kind, and it just got louder and louder. And finally, thank goodness, I was really afraid they were going to insist that we stayed there till we saw it, and then it would be too late, because we still had a lot of walking to do to get back out of there, and there were holes. I'm lucky I didn't snap my ankle, because there was a hole that I couldn't see at all. I stepped in it and luckily had my higher boots on and didn't. But it was just so scary to be out there that was in that place known for the Mothman, with all the lore that's gone on about that, and then have it completely dark, and then all these creatures. Well, this still hasn't been shown, by the way. I'm still waiting for it to come up, but it'll be pretty interesting, I think, when it does.
Well, the dark by itself is bad enough. And then when you hear it doesn't have to be supernatural. It could just be crazy dogs or wolves, like you're saying, in the darkness. And that's scary as hell. You don't know what's going on out there.
Exactly.
And so then when your brain starts, like you're saying, your brain starts working and you're thinking, okay, what is that? I don't know. And then you start creating something that maybe is even worse than probably worse than the reality. So I just have a few more questions. Do you also investigate water-based monsters as well, being up there on the Great Lakes in Wisconsin, or is it just land-based?
Well, I've written quite a bit about, I have one book called Lake and Sea Monsters that includes quite a few. And then my book, American Monsters, has a whole section of the book is on flying things, so it's not just the things that look like flying squatchmen. There are gigantic stork-like things that people see. In fact, I opened the whole book with this one sighting because it's probably one of the best large bird sightings anybody ever had. It was way in northern Wisconsin by a businessman who was vacationing with his family, riding a bike out on a little asphalt road, and he looks over in this meadow, and there is this giant silvery white stork-like bird sitting in the meadow. And he said it was so huge, he was shocked. And this guy's maybe 6'2", so it's not some. I mean, he's a big enough guy himself, and he said he realized it was bigger than him, and he was like so entranced he almost didn't know what overcame him, but he just dropped the bike where it was and began wading into this meadow. And he said he got about halfway in, and the thing heard him and turned its head toward him, and then he thought, oh no, what if it's like a female sitting on its eggs, and it was way bigger than a crane of any kind, anything he could identify. But he startled it, and it immediately began to try and take flight. And he said he could see its wings were kind of puffing as the thing tried to get enough air to get off of the ground. And it finally did. It was kind of hopscotching and get up a little bit, and then hopscotch and get up a little more, and finally went over to the asphalt road, kind of where he had dropped his bicycle, and it was able to kind of gain purchase on the wind right there and get up enough so that he saw it flying away from him. And he was glad about that, not only because it was flying away and not coming back to kill him, but because he knew that there was a little airport down the road and that it would show up on the radar. And guess what? Nothing showed up on the radar. And he knew the exact moment when it happened, the exact minutes. And he said he had a camera. He was too entranced by everything that was going on to even ever think of it. So he didn't get a photo. But the trouble with most aerial sightings is you see a bird in the sky and you have nothing to compare it to for size. And that's one of the major tools of any cryptid investigator.
Yeah, there's definitely no context with something is against a blue sky.
Right.
You don't know how large it is. But that sounds like the kind of guy that you need with you on your next hunt. He runs after the monsters. He doesn't run away.
I have a couple like that anyway, that it always kind of amazes me that they do that. But no, he did realize and came to his senses before he got too close. And very, very, just like I said, a businessman, a very nice person, never had anything like this happen before to him. That's something I always ask people. It's about 50-50. Mm-hmm. About half say they've had some kind of weird, maybe it was just seeing a ghost for a minute or something, but even that is surprising that many people will confess it.
This is the problem, Linda, with somebody as prolific as you, is we kind of gone through most of the time here, and I really, we could do this a couple more times and just kind of narrow down some of these other things. I have two more questions, if it's okay. And on your website, you have a section where you take eyewitness accounts. So if someone in the audience listening here sees something that they can't explain, they can report that to you. How do they do that?
Yeah, again, just go to lindagodfrey.com, and there are no WWs in it, just lindagodfrey.com. And then again, I have the tabs that are sort of at the top, and you'll see one that says About. And just scroll down, tag on to that About one, scroll down, and you'll see a box where you can type anything in there. And I'll usually give you then my email address, and I usually ask people to write it out as best they can. So they can type as much as they want in there, or we can talk, and then we'll talk on the phone if possible. So I like to be as thorough as I can.
No doubt. So what would be the holy grail for you, is my last question. If you had one monster among all the others that you could come face to face with without being immediately killed, What would it be? What would that Holy Grail be?
Well, it's a really hard choice between the upright canine and the Bigfoot, because the Bigfoot, there's just so much in depth there that it would be hard not to. I've had several sightings, and none of them included the face. I saw everything but the face. And I'm not sure I would just, freeze up and die if I saw the face or whatever. It would be such a shock at this point. But either that or the dog man, I think. The dog man, I may have seen part of its back, a 7-foot one with gray fur. And I saw part of its back as it ran across a road in a very, very extremely rural part of Michigan.
Oh boy!
But not enough to say for sure what it was. With the Bigfoots, I could tell. I have no hesitation in saying that is exactly what they had to be.
Well, thanks so much, Linda, for joining me on the show today. Like I said, I could probably have you a couple more times, and we could focus in more on other things. It's hard to be,
Sure.
We have so much time. But
sure, anytime.
I know right now we're not really doing public appearances right now with the way things are going in the world. But is there anything else that you would like to promote for a moment? A new book that's coming out, something you're doing in terms of a documentary, things like that?
Well, the documentary would be the big thing right now, and since this was produced, well, my youngest son was he was the videographer, or the videographer, I guess it would be, the audiologist, did all the music, put the whole thing together, but we're still kind of figuring out the marketing thing. We did actually receive first place in documentaries at the Midwest Weird Fest Film Festival earlier in this past month.
Nice.
Which was a big honor, since it's our first film made on a micro shoestring budget. But it held together pretty well. So I wouldn't mind talking about that. People can go, can find that also, links at lindagodfrey.com. Just go there and you'll find a link to it. It's called Return to Wildcat Mountain, Wisconsin's Black Panther Nexus.
Okay. So thank you once again, Linda Godfrey.
You're welcome.
Internet is lindagodfrey.com, no W's, as she says. And you can find all of her books on amazon.com as well. So thank you very much, and we'll maybe hopefully get and talk to you again soon.
Thank you to you, Peter, and to all of your listeners.
Thank you.
And stay well, everybody.
You too. Thank you. All right. So that was Linda Godfrey, American Monsters, and I Know What I Saw. Again, I just love that name because you can hear somebody saying it, right? A lot of information there, a lot of things that she had to talk about, and that's really kind of the pitfall that you find yourself in when you talk to somebody who's as prolific as that. Is she's got 18 books about every type of monster you can. You open yourself up to eyewitness accounts from all over the country, and you never know what you're going to get. And so then you have, 4 or 5 shows worth of material that we could talk about, and you always kind of feel like you're, you haven't scratched the surface yet. Dogmen? I don't know about dogmen. That always seems a little sketchy to me. I don't know what the difference is between a dogman and a werewolf. To me, they seem the same. Bigfoot, hide and seek champ, right? I mean, I know I had somebody talking to me. I've had a podcast with someone 4 or 5 months ago with a researcher, and he estimated at the time that he thought there were something like 4,000 Bigfoot in the country, in the United States. And I kind of pressed him on it, and I asked him, well, how do you know that? I mean, we've never found anything. How do you put a number on how many of these potential creatures are there? The forest is vast. The forest is deep. There's a lot of things that could be living there, not mythical, but just as deadly as ever. Who knows what's in there? But I don't know how you can project a specific number of things that you've never actually seen. I was surprised that Linda actually did say she's found at least some footprints. I mean, prints of that, but I've never seen anybody that's found a skull, that's found a long bone of a leg somewhere, any body of the torso. It just seems odd to me that you would never find a carcass of any kind, of any of these things. We never found a dogman carcass, never found a Bigfoot carcass, never found a werewolf carcass. I get that you're in the woods, things die and things pull it apart, but we find people's carcasses in the woods all the time. So it seems like you could find that as well. I mean, I don't know. What do you think out there? If you have questions or comments, you can drop us a line on our Gmail account. It's provemewrongcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. It's just Prove Me Wrong. If you would like to listen to the podcast, we are on all podcast formats: SoundCloud, Spotify, Tunein Radio, Stitcher, really anything, any place where you find podcasts, you can find the Prove Me Wrong podcast. Like and subscribe to the page, and you'll be notified when a new show releases. We typically release a show once a week. We're also on YouTube, as you can see right here. The Prove Me Wrong podcast. Like and subscribe. And once again, you will be notified when a new video releases and you're able to see it. So YouTube, SoundCloud, pretty much everywhere. Facebook, Instagram, we're all over the place. We're streaming right now as well. Our sponsors tonight are Javaremix. It's a perfect blend of 100% organic Arabica coffee. It's infused with nano-emulsified CBD. You get to start your day off on the right foot with a great cup of coffee with all the benefits of CBD. Javaremix offers traditional ground coffee as well as single-serve K-cups in regular and decaf. If you aren't a coffee person, that's okay. Javaremix also offers CBD-infused teas and body scrubs, bath bombs, really anything that you're looking for. As an added benefit for our Prove Me Wrong listeners, if you go online right now, javaremix.com, and type in the promo code Prove Me Wrong, you'll get an extra 20% off discount on your entire shopping experience. And Javaremix also offers free shipping on all orders over $40. So you literally have no reason not to give it a shot. Once again, that's javaremix.com, promo code Prove Me Wrong. The Prove Me Wrong podcast is also brought to you tonight by ZendoZones by J.T. Eaton. They're shaped like fearless little tiki gods, so let Surf and Stan, Hawaiian Howie, and Luau Lily bring the islands to your backyard with ZendoZones citronella burners. ZendoZones uses natural 3% citronella candles and incense cones. They're perfect for patios, decks, backyards, campsites, and the deep woods, poolside, and more. You can enjoy the outdoors again. Hopefully catch yourself a dog man or Bigfoot. They're available on Amazon or at select Ace Hardware stores. Collect them all today. So once again, for my guest, Linda Godfrey, lindagodfrey.com. You can find any one of her 18 books on amazon.com. This is Pete Lieb with the Prove Me Wrong podcast, and we'll talk to you again soon.